Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Faithless Forrest.
And I'm Joe Barnhart. And we want you to know that if you have beliefs, whether in God or out of God, you're welcome to this program. You're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, if you're an atheist or an agnostic, you have friends. That's what the First Amendment is about.
All right. Well, this month is the birth anniversary of Robert Ingersoll, and today we will review an important idea of his on the atonement.
Atonement. We want to get into some depth on that. A very crucial idea. This is a call-in show, so if you will, think with us and challenge us, question, but engage us, because this is a very important topic and has been for the human race for many, many years.
All right, and the phone number is there on the bottom of the screen.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, the Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun meetup group. They often meet at a bar or an eatery. Sometimes we even do karaoke. Tonight, the meetup is at Barley's for happy hour after the show, food, drink, and conversation. Look for the silver jacketed copy of The God Delusion sitting on the table. And as we say, everyone's welcome, but as Matt Delahunty of the Atheist Experience says, please come, but if you plan to preach, proselytize, however that word's pronounced, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't come. All right? Please tell us about the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
Yeah, the Rationalists of East Tennessee meet at Pellissippi State at the cafeteria there.
In the cafeteria annex of the Goins building, I believe it's pronounced.
And that's the first and third Sundays, usually about 10:30 or earlier.
We meet and snack at about 10 o'clock, and about 10:30 a program or discussion begins.
And then on the first, the second Sunday, is a book that's going to be discussed. You don't have to have read it, by Bertrand Russell, famous mathematician and philosopher, called Religion and Science. And then on the third Sunday, Phil King is going to talk about Jesus, fact or fiction. And there are many theories on who the historical Jesus was, and he's going to deal with it. And he's got some very interesting material. I've read some of what he's got.
I'm looking forward to that. And finally, on the fourth Sunday, we have Reflections Gathering. This is kind of like a potluck afternoon get-together. And often at a member's home. And this month's subject is the future. We will ask participants to offer predictions about what will happen in the future, 5, 50, and 100 years, in the fields of communications, politics, economics, religion, environment, medicine, privacy, and social interactions. Please visit our website for details, including the times and the exact locations. All right.
Okay.
Well, we're ready to start talking about Ingersoll.
And Ingersoll's birthday is what we're celebrating all month.
Yes, indeed.
And Ingersoll was the most popular speaker around the time of the Civil War. I mean, that was just before radio and television. And of all the speakers in America, he apparently was the most popular. You can read about him in a very interesting encyclopedia. It's called the New Encyclopedia of Unbelief.
Man, hold that up, Joe. Hold that up.
And that is very, very interesting.
Can we get the camera in on the cover on that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting encyclopedia. And the one on Ingersoll is quite interesting. Tom Flynn wrote it, and he did a very good job of research. Ingersoll was very strong in those days in the Republican Party when it was
when it was the Progressive Party of freedom.
The party of Lincoln, yes.
All right. Well, let's remind the viewers that this is a call-in show. And let's explain. There's about a 7-second delay from when we speak here in the studio before it gets out through the broadcast system to your television. So when you call in, we'll ask you to mute your television and speak to us on your telephone so that we can have a natural conversation. If you don't do that, it gets very confusing with the 7-second delay. All right? Well, so Joe, Ingersoll had strong views on the atonement. So define for us the atonement, and in particular, maybe the breadth of different versions of it?
Yeah, it has a long, long history, long before Judaism, long before Christianity. It's been part of the human species. Literally, it means at one-ment. It's when people are at odds and they need to be back at one again. And then, of course, the question is, what are the means you go through to bring that reconciliation back together?
Okay.
And various traditions have various ways of going about it, and they are greatly different from each other.
All right.
Greatly different. Now, some people think the early Christians did not hold that Jesus was an atonement in the sense of a blood sacrifice to God, as if God were demanding blood. Now, there were views of gods among the Greeks and others in which it's clear some of those believers thought God had to have blood as a sacrifice. Now, my guess is one reason is the priest in charge of it were tired of being vegetarians. See, they get in on part of the the feast, and so when they talk about the fat of, in those days they didn't know fat was all that bad for you. It was just, as you well know, a beefsteak that has more fat in it tastes better.
It's more flavorful.
Yeah,
yes.
more. And in those days, they didn't know about cholesterol that much.
Well, and in fact, in those days, perhaps calories didn't come so cheaply, and that eating the fat was important to maintain your own body weight.
That's a good point, yeah.
Well, when I started looking up atonement myself, in Wikipedia, I ran into a specific variety of atonement they called substitutionary atonement.
That's Anselm and others that we'll get in. Anselm was the Archbishop of Canterbury in the feudalistic time of England.
Okay.
And he came up with the notion, he was in the Roman Church, that God had been offended by human sin and had to be satisfied. Now, this is called the satisfaction theory. And the satisfaction was like a debt, and it had to be paid. But human beings didn't have enough resources on this, according to Anselm.
There was too deep a debt to be paid. So they had to keep paying on the interest, apparently?
Well, apparently that wouldn't work on this theory. So Anselm came up with the notion that Jesus was the supreme sacrifice that God demanded. And he was a perfect sacrifice, perfect Lamb of God, you see. And once God got this sacrifice, then his wrath and honor were satisfied. Now that sounds pretty much like vendetta, but we've got to remember much of this sacrificial theory came out of vendettas among tribes. For example, if you kill someone in one tribe, then they expect some kind of compensation. Kill somebody.
In other words, a substitutionary atonement or death. Okay. Well, I think maybe we should share with the listeners the definition here right out of the Wikipedia page. You want me to tackle the issue?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So they talk about this substitutionary atonement as a theological term that is used to describe an act that pays for or erases one's sins or transgressions. All right, let's elaborate on sins. Sin is some kind of a crime against a deity.
Yeah.
It is interesting. It was a distinction I didn't even think about or know about until I was in an RAT discussion once where someone defined it that way and separated its definition out from something like a moral transgression.
Now, in other words,
to not believe in Jehovah is a kind of a crime against Jehovah, but it's not a moral crime such as hurting someone would be.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, in some cultures, say some versions of Islam, that is the supreme crime, is not believing in this. And that was part of this tradition that we're talking about.
They go on to say, the word often is used in the Old Testament to translate the Hebrew word kippur or kippurium, which means propitiation or expiation. Expiation. All right. Not words I use in everyday language, I'll say. The word occurs in the King James Version in Romans 5:11 and has the basic meaning of reconciliation. Yeah. So that would be that at-one-ment of which you were speaking. In the Old Testament Hebrew, or Tanakh.
In other words, that's the Torah plus. Yeah.
Okay. Atonement was accomplished by the sacrifice of specified animals, such as lambs, to pay for one's sins. And all throughout the Pentateuch, we have, Jehovah asking for the firstborn, spotless lambs.
Yeah. In Leviticus, if you look in an index, you can read the sweet savor. In other words, the God, as if the God was smelling this. Now, of course, we know where the meat went, often to the priest and to the people.
Yeah. So if we go chronologically, though, when I think about having read the Bible, the first thing that kind of comes to me as an occurrence of killing in the Bible is the story of Cain and Abel. And it seems to me that that's sort of tied in with this sort of concept of a sacrifice, because what did Cain do? He brought his produce. He was the farmer.
He was a farmer.
And what did Abel bring?
Well, he was a herdsman, so he brought in meat.
Yeah, he brought in meat. And so what we had is...
Well, according to the text, God favored Abel and his sacrifice. I mean, this is a herdsman's point of view, obviously.
Yeah.
And Cain then felt rejected and was angry and became jealous and killed him.
Yeah, and the actual word in, I think this is a King James version, is they referred to as the Lord had regard for Abel and his offerings, but he did not have regard for Cain and his offerings. And so what was the consequence of the Lord having and not having regard?
Well, I think this...
What was the consequence for Cain and Abel?
Well, obviously for Cain and Abel, he eventually lost. He got killed, but Cain was regarded as second-rate because his sacrifice was inferior. Now, we have moved beyond that, so that the modern commentary would say something like this. It wasn't the sacrifice per se. It was Cain's attitude. And that's not what the text says.
Yeah. Okay. In other words, for people who are looking to apologize for the Bible.
Well, yeah, they're trying to say that's in other words, they recognize the crudity of it, the savagery of it. And so they're trying to say, well, it wasn't that God favored meat over grain, you see, or blood over grain. It was Cain's attitude. But when you read much of the Bible, particularly in the Hebrew text, God wants blood. Now, you can understand this in a cultural context, because the Bible is basically a revelation about people. And people wanted blood sacrificed during wars when you had these tribal wars, the Amalekites. And for example, here's a book by a biblical scholar saying that in the Hebrew Bible...
Hold the cover up so the audience can see it.
It's called War in the Hebrew Bible.
All right.
Very good scholar, learns from both Christians and good rabbi scholars. Her position is that there are passages in the Bible showing that Yahweh wanted the annihilation of certain tribes, and they were to be a sacrifice to him. And she says it seems as if, in some case, some of these passages, this deity is so warmongering that human sacrifice is the better kind of sacrifice.
Wow.
I mean, it is a bloody. The Hebrew Bible and much of the New Testament have both the highest morals you can find and the most degrading you can find. Both.
Well, they are a product.
They are human
people.
books.
Yes.
Yeah, the products of you and me.
I guess the kind of point I was trying to make, though, is that when Jehovah made this choice between Cain and Abel, he, to read the text of the Bible, he kind of provoked Cain. And you got to ask the question, if a God who can see the future, was that his intent, therefore?
Well, that's a big problem throughout the book of Genesis. You would say, okay, if this deity really understood what his plan was going to bring about, namely, we talked about this with the flood, when you're going to annihilate almost most of what you've created, and you didn't anticipate this, let's not talk about omniscience. But see, the Orthodox theology tries to take that part of the Bible as divine revelation and still hold to omniscience, which makes it even worse. God even knew it would happen. He said, let's bring it about. I know I'm going to wipe them all out anyhow, but let's do it.
It's just part of the plan. All right. Well, you mentioned Noah and the flood. So if we fast forward a little further in the Bible, what happened after the flood? He releases the dove. The dove doesn't come back. And okay, time to leave the ark. So after gathering 2 of every kind of animal and saving them from the flood, what did Noah do? Noah built an altar to God and offered burnt offerings of every clean animal and of every clean bird. Genesis 8:20. God smelled the pleasing odor and vowed never again to doom the earth because of man, as man's imaginings are evil from his youth. But God would preserve the seasons so long as the earth endured. Of course, now I've read the Bible, and I know that there are contradictory passages there regarding the passenger list of the ark. In one passage, Noah is commanded to take 2 of each kind, and in another passage, he's commanded to take 7 of each kind of clean and only 2 of each kind of unclean.
Well, either way, it doesn't fit with much of reality, because you cannot get out from that ark the animal kingdom thereafter. It takes a really a fast version of evolution, fast forward evolution to do that.
Yeah, but I guess I kind of wanted to point out the fact that if you overlook that passage where you're taking 7 of each kind of the clean, man, if afterwards you unload and you take 1 of each of the clean kind and you sacrifice, I think we'd be surrounded only by unclean animals at this point.
With that much sacrifice going on.
Yeah. Well, and if they were a mating pair, you've lost it.
Thinking of sacrifice, now look at it, see, from a human point of view. Let's say you're a mother, and you see that one of your children is going to end up as a sacrifice. Okay, you're going to start negotiating. Wouldn't it be better if we took a lamb out there, a sheep? A lamb, you see, doesn't have a lot of wool, so we could afford that. Or how about you have in the Hebrew Bible, you have pigeons, you see. You have various kinds of animals. Now, you don't have a case of donkeys. Now, donkeys were very valuable.
Okay.
So it'd be like...
because they helped with work.
Yeah, it'd be like killing a cow in India. A cow is too valuable. You don't want to be...
to merely eat.
Yeah. I mean, they produce milk. They produce other cattle.
They help you plow your fields.
Plow, yeah. So, and you can see then why animal sacrifice was developed, and from a civilizing point of view, it's better than sacrificing children and other, grown people. In which you have a lot of human sacrifice in the Bible.
Well, I was going to move on and talk about the story of the offering of Abraham. I'm somewhat surprised that many Christians do not seem to know about, or do seem to know about the story of Abraham.
They do, sure.
But they seem to kind of suspend their moral sense. At least that's what I think they have to do in order not to just condemn the book.
Well, here's what the text says. That God, turns out, didn't want that sacrifice after all. Now, Abraham believed...
Okay, yeah, go on.
Yeah. Now, it's a kind of a cynical passage when you think about it. It's sort of, Yahweh has the son now, or Abraham.
Abraham has his son bound.
The butcher knife raised.
The knife is raised.
And then, of course, he's stopped. And you got this.
An angel appears, stays his hand.
And it's sort of like Yahweh is saying, just kidding, didn't really mean it. Just wanted to see if you were willing to do it. And some people say, and this, think about this, Abraham didn't kill the son after all. His faith was he was willing to do it. Now, think about that. Here's a guy, supposedly sane and not a pervert, who is willing to murder his own son because he hears a voice. Now, today, if a man did this, we would lock him up. In fact, they had a case in California of a man who slaughtered his own son, or was it a daughter? I've forgotten which. You can read about it in Abraham on Trial. An anthropologist wrote about it. Mm-hmm. And it was a case in California. What happened is this parent, I mean, you can see, this is a horrible story, had to go to trial for killing their child. Mm-hmm. And the judgment was that it was not guilty by reason of insanity. Yeah. And I would say, if this story of Abraham is true, which I rather doubt. Yeah.
Oh, I can't help but imagine that there have been insane people.
But there were insane people at that time doing that sort of thing.
They could have been written about. The scary thing about this, though, is that this is placing as a central element of the three great monotheisms on the planet, a central character who is held up
that's unfortunate.
For this amoral behavior. And not amoral, this immoral behavior.
Yeah, and this is the same man who lied about his own wife's identity in terms of whether he was a sister or a wife, so as to save his own skin. And he also he had another woman, and he got her pregnant. And then Sarah said, kick her out and kick the child out. And good old Abraham did that and gave her a jug of water.
Yep.
And that's what I would call not good fatherhood. So we've called that Father Abraham, but I don't think at that point he deserves the title.
Yeah.
And I think religions are not, they're based more on something than that, for sure.
Well, stumbling around for passages regarding Abraham, I'd run into a quote by a George Bly, who I don't know what brings him fame, but I liked his quote. He said, "Believers who have faith in God have no conscience concerning human decency," and that sure has got to apply.
Well, no, I think he's wrong on that. There are many Christians who obviously believe in God, mm-hmm. but they don't believe in everything in the Bible. They're not savages. And he's simply wrong.
But if by faith here, if we mean a blind, trusting faith to do anything Jehovah says, then that would be the case, because that's what Abraham was.
Here's what a Methodist minister said, and I think he's right in this context. He says the real problem, this is for Christians, is not whether you believe in God, it's what kind of God you believe in. Now, he is taking an easy target. Mm-hmm. Now, you've seen this in debates, where your guy is debating one guy, and you pick out the weakest part of the argument and make that the major part, because that makes your argument look better. Well, and that's what he does here. And that's not fair.
It would be fair if your argument has as an essential part that weak part. So, for instance, if your argument is a chain, it can be no stronger than the weakest link. So if it is a chain, that's a fair way to do it. An analogy might work like this, Joe.
Oh, let me give you an example.
Sure.
If your argument works, Joseph Stalin was an atheist, right?
No, that's not a chain that you're talking about.
Well, you got my point. The chain argument won't work. Go ahead.
But actually, we should remind the viewers, this is a call-in program. We're not quite halfway. There's plenty of time to call in. Number on your screen.
I think we already had one. You and I got carried away.
Well, the screen, I never saw that we were told to pick up. So when you call in, the phone will be answered. You'll be asked briefly about subject you want to speak to, and when the screener's satisfied, we'll be notified and we'll pick up.
Let's take the notion. See what
I'd like to finish the argument though about the weak link. And you mentioned Stalin. So we could talk about the Soviet Union as the place where there was a communist revolution, and the communists replaced the czarist system. During the period, the early period of communism, they went from a nation that was very illiterate to a nation of near universal literacy. They industrialized to the point where they stood their ground and, with help from other parts of the world, pushed back the Nazis, who were the industrial powerhouse of Europe. So the Soviet Union transformed those people. Now, if all we want to do is judge them on their strengths, that sounds like a great thing. But if we also say that, you know, they were brutal to their own people, they didn't allow freedom, then we can rightly condemn the Soviet Union for that.
We're talking about sacrifice, right?
And
Stalin sacrificed millions of his own people. Millions.
And as a result, we should say we shouldn't judge the Soviet Union purely on the good things it does. In a sense, we have to look for the worst things and say that's not good enough.
That's precisely my argument. The same with Christians. Don't judge. Don't pick out some Christians, the most barbaric, and judge the whole thing. Your argument.
But we also have to pick those things that are unacceptable, and we must label them as such.
Those aspects. Good. I'm with you on that.
All right.
Let's take the doctrine of hell. So we can agree on this.
For or against hell?
Well, let's just find out.
All right.
It seems to me. See, we've been talking about the Hebrew Bible.
Yes.
But it's the New Testament primarily that talks the most atrocious sacrifice ever concocted by the most obscene mind on earth.
Now, let me again,
the notion that most of the human race will be a burning sacrifice to God forever and ever. Now, you talk about meanness and viciousness and wickedness. I can't think of a more wicked viewpoint than that. In fact, it is so wicked, it makes Joseph Stalin, whom I regard as a total thug, look like a Sunday school teacher by comparison.
At least incompetent.
I can't. When you slaughter millions of people, the word incompetence is a cop-out. Come on, let's face it. It's brutal, it's thuggery, it's vicious. He is an atheist who does not represent most atheists that I know. There are most atheists I know are humanists. Joseph Stalin was not a humanist. He was a criminal mind.
He was the center of a personality cult.
In fact, he was so brutal that Khrushchev was afraid of him. In fact, when he died, nobody wanted to go around his body for a good while because they were afraid he was pretending.
That it was just a test.
Yeah. So he lay there for a good while. These were fellow communists. Now, so what I'm saying is some ideologies develop brutal, cruel aspects, and some versions of religion have done this, and some versions of atheism have done it.
All right. Well, let's echo Ingersoll here again.
A great humanist atheist.
There we go. So he says, every priest became a butcherer, and every sanctuary a slaughterhouse. Nothing could be more utterly shocking to a refined and loving soul. Nothing could have been better calculated to harden the heart of this continual shedding of innocent blood. This terrible system is supposed to have culminated in the sacrifice of Christ. Well, we're finally getting to the New Testament here. His blood took the place of all others. It is necessary to shed no more. The law at last is satisfied and satiated. And a further word, surfeited. Okay. The idea that God wants blood is all at the bottom of atonement and rests upon the most fearful savagery. Oh, I think he did a great job of summing that up there.
There were Hebrew prophets. See, if you read the Hebrew Bible, not as one book, but a number of traditions, the prophets, many of them seem to be on the opposite side of the priest in some areas. That they're the prophet saying God what he loves, is to walk humbly, love God, walk humbly, and love justice. There's no mention of sacrifice. In fact, I think some of the prophets probably thought it was pretty savage. Now, Jeremiah opposed the offering of children as sacrifice. But how far Jeremiah would go with that, I don't know. I have a feeling that he was moving in a direction thinking this whole notion might be useless.
I was trying to remember what I read the Bible, and Jeremiah dwelt an awful lot about, oh, woe is Israel, and Israel is sin.
Okay, let's deal with it.
Needs to be brought out. And becomes repentant, then they'll come out of bondage, right? I think that was maybe a nickel summary.
I think you could say, in some ways, the sacrificial system partly developed out of the problem of theodicy, the problem of suffering. Here, the northern kingdom, in the Hebrew tradition now, the northern kingdom was conquered in 722 by the Assyrians. And in 586, the Babylonians conquered the southern kingdom and sacked the temple. Okay. Now, imagine you're believing that Yahweh, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, ruler of the universe, and his sanctuary is there in Jerusalem now, and the enemy comes in and simply demolishes the whole thing. Furthermore, carries
all the gold,
takes the priests and all the trappings away into Babylonian captivity for the southern kingdom. Now that was and the prophets had to come up with a theory,
an explanation,
and one of the explanations was not that the Syrians just had better armies. You see, the explanation is that God decided not to protect his chosen nation because they were too wicked. Now, the fact that human beings are always less than perfect, that argument is always going to work. Jerry Falwell tried that before he probably died of overeating or whatever. Well, now, by the way, you don't hear very many preachers like that rail against gluttony. Have you ever noticed? Which is in the Bible, but fried chicken somehow is part of the divine.
I don't dwell on those radio stations very long on Sunday mornings, but you're absolutely right. I haven't heard them railing against gluttony.
Well, it is embarrassing.
Well, let's remind the viewers, this is a call-in show. Today's subject is the atonement, and of course, we're obviously coming down on the side of it being rather an unjust idea. And
let's talk about Abelard.
All right. I don't know anything about this Abelard. Tell me more, Joe.
Okay, Abelard was a Christian in the Middle Ages. Well, we've got a caller, so let's
let the call screener get them. Okay,
Abelard was a monk in the church. I think he died, I think, around 1147. I'd have to look it up. I get him and Anselm mixed up sometime. But no, he was, anyhow. And then Abelard came up with the notion, contrary to Anselm, is that the death of Christ was not a blood sacrifice. Rather, Christ was doing good, teaching forgiveness, love, kindness, and grace, and he was murdered.
All right.
And that, when people realized that this innocent man was killed, that brought them to repentance, you
that
see.
Did. Okay. I got it. We've been signaled that our caller is ready, so why don't
let's go.
Say, caller, hello? Oh, well, we're missing you. Here. So, caller, we had a confusion on the phone here, so please call back. And
please do.
I guess we're going to pick up. We're going to pick up. Well, hello there. I'm Faithless Forrest. Please give us a name or a nickname so that we know how to address you, and then give us a short question or comment.
Nickname, Red Leader.
Red Leader.
Red Leader. All right. Red Leader, what's your question or comment?
Well, I'm getting a little bit of a buzz here. Earlier, you mentioned Abraham.
Mm-hmm. Sure enough.
And his son was named Ishmael. Isn't that right?
Yeah,
that's
one of them. Yeah,
there's two sons.
That's Hagar's son. Yeah.
So amplifying your question.
Well, was it? I think it was Ishmael was the one that was taken for the. No, he wasn't. It was the other one.
It was Isaac who was taken for the sacrifice.
That's right. Mm-hmm. But everybody always talks about Abraham and why he did the thing he did and all of that sort of stuff. And every time I hear that story, I think of poor Isaac.
Yeah. The trauma.
Well, and that's because you're human. You can.
Well, it's not so much that Isaac was in danger of being sacrificed, but I was just thinking of how nervous he must be from then on.
No,
absolutely.
He's got a very. That's
I mean, when you go to one of these, when you go to church, and I remember going to a Methodist church, and they tell a story about how Abraham was so good and faithful and loyal, and then everybody in the audience were going, "Yes, we believe too. We want to be like Abraham." And I just imagine some kid going, "Dad, let's not get caught up here."
Well, thank goodness.
Oh, yes.
Not all Christians, most Christians don't pay that much attention to every part of the Bible.
Well, yeah, but when your dad's in the kitchen making a sandwich,
handling a knife,
watching him real close when he gets close to that, that chopping block thing.
All right, yeah, and you've hit on the point that for everyone involved, except apparently God, who knew He was going to send an angel just in the nick of time. Everyone involved thought this was going to go down, that Isaac was about to die, and to every spectator that should have been a crime.
Well, when I ask people about that, I say, well, if God was to tell you to kill a child, would you do it? And the answer always comes back, he wouldn't do that. I go, but he did once. He said, yeah, but he wouldn't do that. I mean, he wouldn't. It would be a test. He wouldn't really do that. And I said, well, but would you if he did? And most people, to their credit, don't say they won't do it. But it still comes down to this. I kind of figure if it weren't for those 10 Commandments, I don't know what these Christians would be doing. Around, lying, killing.
Oh, I don't think. I rather doubt that. I think most Christians develop their morality in their families, in their schools, and in the neighborhood, and it's not because somebody quoted the 10 Commandments. In fact, most people in this country cannot tell you what the 10 Commandments are.
That's a great question. Yeah.
So,
however, when you come right down to it,
go ahead.
You mentioned Cain and Abel earlier.
Uh-huh.
According to that, though, when Cain killed Abel, it wasn't a crime at that time.
Well, it's hard to interpret. When I read it, I get the impression that Cain may be the only male breeding, and if you kill him off, humanity's over. Now, maybe there were already children by Abel, and I know that there are Christians who think that people living today are descendant from both. But so the Bible says that Cain is like, oh, woe is me, I'll be welcome nowhere, and I'll be killed immediately. And God puts a mark on him to protect him. Mm-hmm. And now that protection wasn't necessarily forgiveness so much as
to protect him from being slaughtered. Yeah.
It was protection against the ultimate capital punishment. Mm-hmm. That's not the same as a forgiveness. I don't get that out of my reading of the Bible.
I think you're right. It doesn't seem like any. In fact, of course, Cain does not show any remorse, for one thing, for killing.
Well, it wasn't. I mean, seriously, I just don't understand how it could be a crime at that time. I mean, after all, he was the first one to die, right? So how did he know that an axe in the head would actually cause someone to die? It could be an accident,
Let me deal with that a little bit. Some people believe that the passage, let us make man in our own image. Now, what that means, we don't know from just reading what the Hebrew writer is saying there. But they pump into that, many theologians, the notion of a conscience. You see what I'm saying? So that built into being human is a conscience, which then automatically lets you know that killing is wrong. Now, I would say that's probably mistaken, that a conscience itself is partly genetic and the creation that mothers and aunts and uncles and fathers and the community help inculcate into a child over a number of years, so that they are not just, I would say, everybody knows that you are not born with a conscience. Look at a 2-year-old. And you know a 2-year-old does not have what we would call anything like a conscience that's superior to what a baboon's conscience is. It may not even be up to. I rather doubt it's up to.
An adult baboon is going to have a moral sense very similar to ours. They're not going to hurt people out of spite, or they're not going to hurt their tribesmate out of spite.
So you're saying that in order to hurt somebody, like, say, a suicide bomber or a murderer or something like that, you have to override that innate group family consciousness?
Yeah, you do.
At least that most people have.
Now,
about 4% of the population is thought to not have the
Well, I'm sure there's other people wanting to call in, and I don't want to hog y'all's time. So, Red Leader signing off.
Red Leader, thank you for calling in.
All right, bye-bye.
Good comments.
All right, and I wanted to say, Red Leader, and anyone listening, that, you know, although we talked about the example of Isaac's offering, there is also the example of I think he was the king of, I can't remember, northern, southern kingdom.
King of
Jephthah,
yeah.
who sacrificed his daughter, and God didn't intervene to stop the daughter's death.
Well, you could argue this, try this, that was his deal that he made with God.
Yeah.
Now you got to say,
it was initiated by a different party.
Here's the way it's going to be, God. I'm going to go out and go to war, and you then get me victory, and I'll sacrifice whatever comes out of my house first. That's the deal. Now I'm off to war. Now, nowhere in that text does it say God said, "Okay, I'm with you." That's Jephthah. Now, to be fair, there are many passages in the Bible. Look to me as if a lot of passages in the Bible, these are people representing the deity from their own point of view.
For their own.
So Jephthah is more of a model than we like to admit.
All right. Well, I guess that caller decided not to talk to us on air, so we got about 16 minutes left. We have time for some more calls. The number's right there on your screen. And we'd like to hear your thoughts as well. I must say, I very much like Red Leader's observation when he asked the question, if Abel is the first human to have died, did Cain even understand that there could be death? In other words, that, that striking someone could actually harm. Looks like we may have a question being passed in.
Okay, let's read.
Why don't you read that?
Are we atheists? Are we ridiculous? We are ridiculous. We should read a Bible.
Read a Bible. All right. Well, that's great. Well, I guess that was Patrick called in. Thank you.
Here's the Bible, one translation. There's many, many translations.
And this is my Bible. This is the one I've read cover to cover. Took me a couple years.
So I would challenge the reader to give us some passages from the Bible to show us that we have misinterpreted the Bible, if you think so.
Yep.
Because we're saying we are interpreting the Bible. It's right there in plain black and white. That there is murder, thuggery, viciousness, as well as love, joy, and happiness in the Bible.
And just like I said, that if we are to condemn the Soviet Union for its shortcomings, then this book is also fair game for its shortcomings. Yeah. And if we are only going to judge on the good things, well, then the Soviet Union's a model society. I guess we're ready to pick up?
All right. Yeah, if you're going to cheat.
You're on the air. I'm Faithless Forrest. Please give us a name or a nickname, and then a short question or comment.
Faye.
Go.
Did you say Faye?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
My question is something I've wondered about since God is three persons in one, and they are all God and all eternal. How, when Christ was on the cross, wasn't God actually punishing part of himself?
Okay, that's a very, very useful question.
All right, I'll let you run with that for a while, because that Trinity stuff's
okay, well, yeah, the Trinity
me.
thing is one of the problems that the Trinity was trying to deal with is that the monotheism has locked in this particular version of God, and they need to expand the notion of God, and that's where the Son and the Holy Spirit, I think, came. Now, the Son then is often perceived in the Christian tradition as the more humane side of God. And of course, in the Catholic tradition, you've got the fourth member, and that's the Virgin Mary. Yeah. And in the Eastern Orthodox Church, Mary, there's a story of Mary going to hell and then coming back, and in heaven trying to make a deal, at least giving a vacation in hell, you see.
Really?
In other words, heaven has a problem with looking on all of this atrocity going on, and then Jesus is that aspect of God that is a more humane side, and then since God the Father can't pay the sacrifice, otherwise he'd be out of commission, God has got the Son, and the Son dies, pays the price, and then he's back again after 3 days.
But now, the gist of Faye, your question, though, was God punishing himself? I'm not sure your answer really addresses.
Well, I'm thinking the logic is that God is suffering. Now, the problem with theology is you have two streams in theology. Mm-hmm. And you had this in Christian. You can see in Christian theology a whole history of debates going on, the same as in physics. And you can watch the theories develop. You have one theory is, does God suffer? And they had Latin words for the Father suffering.
Okay.
And some would say God suffers too. He knows the feeling of our infirmities. Mm-hmm. And then you had others who said the Father can't suffer, you see. Now, and that's why they had to make this division. But now, then you have a passage in the New Testament. It says, the Spirit of God grieves, you see?
Yeah.
Now, that's suffering. If the word grief means anything, that's suffering.
And whether you call that identical, at least they're obviously similar.
So why would you have a God who can go on a rampage and angry and become furious and wipe out most of the human race, have that kind of emotion, and yet couldn't have suffering and feeling for somebody else? You see, that's what they were trying to reconcile. Reconcile, yeah.
Well, Fade, I think we've tried to answer your question. Were we the least bit helpful?
Yeah, somewhat, but
go ahead. Give us some.
Did you have anything else?
Yeah.
Or perhaps did you ask that question in churches you were growing up, and how did they answer it?
No, I didn't ask it. But later, I also wondered if you stole something from your neighbor, and then you went back and said you were sorry, and he said, well, I've already beaten my son, so it's already been taken care of, and I won't punish you.
I'm sorry, I laughed, and then I realized that maybe that wasn't just a funny story.
There's a hymn. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. In other words, Jesus paid off your debt.
Yes, but see, I'm not talking about something I actually did. I'm just saying it just doesn't make sense. It's not something
I got you. Yeah.
You can conceive of very well.
All right. Yeah. Like I say, man, I laughed and then thought, then realized with horror that, oh man, it was real.
If you think of pictures of God in the Bible as pictures of human beings, mm-hmm. projections of human beings, then you can.
All right. I guess Joe is trying to make the point that if gods are kind of super anthropomorphized dads, mm-hmm. They're like more powerful dads than we really have, that maybe can do special things. The Egyptians are. Their pantheon is kind of like that, and in fact, I think their pantheon makes a little more sense because just like in a family, you're going to have some people that have disagreement, and that nature of disagreement is a far better explanation of the origin of evil, I think, than what amounts to schizophrenia that Jehovah, Yahweh, Elohim has.
Yeah.
All right?
In fact, you do have in the Hebrew Bible some images and models of God as being like a mother. You see, that trying to develop the warm side. And I mean, you got to think about it. You do have the notion filled in the New Testament of God as pretty angry a lot.
He's punishing a lot.
Yeah, but you also have, and why in the world would you have a God like? I mean, they look at thunder and lightning and floods and all of these, and you get defeated in war. So you've got to account for all this, you see. Then you also have to say, well, you get rain, and you get. See, they had no science.
Yeah.
So the crops grow, and you have birth and so forth. And so they wanted to try to. That's the more gentle aspect of their deity.
You know, the good things in life do tend to be kind of slower and cumulative, where the things that are sudden are going to be, the disasters.
Yeah.
The hail comes, and the crop that had been coming along so nicely is now lost.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easier to cut down a tree than it is to grow a tree.
Yeah. Well, Faye, did you have any further questions or observations? Or if not, maybe we'll get someone else to call in here and expand our horizons again.
All right. No, I'll just say goodbye.
Okay.
Thank you for calling in. All right. Well, we got about 7 minutes left. If you'd like to call, please do so now, and we'll have a time for a little bit of back and forth. This is Freethought Forum, programmed by the Atheist Society of Knoxville
and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
All right. Right here in East Tennessee, we have free thinkers, atheists, and agnostics. We get together after this show at Barley's in the Old Town. And then on Sundays, first and third Sunday, the Rationalists of East Tennessee meet for organized discussions, programs. And on the second Sunday, we do book club.
Yeah.
But right now, we're on the air live. You can call in, the number on your screen.
Let me suggest this, see what you think.
We were talking about another, you were comparing and contrasting two views of the atonement, I think, when the calls came in.
Abelard. Christians differ on this a lot. And I think in the Hebrew tradition, you have Hebrews having the notion that prayer is a service to God. It's more like a sacrifice. And Paul says I think it's the 12th chapter of Romans, around the first verse, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. And then he adds, it's perfectly acceptable. Now, in my opinion, Christianity is revolutionizing this whole notion of sacrifice. This is my view. That it would, in other words, there are two ways to do it. One, you can throw the whole thing out, or you can work inside it and transform it. And on this sacrifice thing, I think they're saying, okay, you want to sacrifice, Jesus died on a cross, that's it, that's the end of it. You read the book of Hebrews, the epistle to the Hebrews, and he says clearly it's a sacrifice once for all, that's it. And
no more blood is needed.
No more priests. Jesus is the high priest. Furthermore, First Peter says let me finish.
Yeah, okay.
Every believer is a priest. And that means the priesthood in charge of sacrificing and that whole gamut of power control is unnecessary.
So when you said priest, the thought flashed through my mind. Wait a minute, don't you mean rabbi, or would it have been rabbi? If I was having a conversation with the author of that epistle, if you're the author, I'm going to say, well, don't you mean rabbi?
No, I don't. Because I think the rabbis in the Hebrew tradition were dealing with this problem.
Okay.
They were moving into an urban environment. They didn't have a lot of animals to be sacrificing in the first place. I think Judaism is not one thing anyhow. You had one tradition in Judaism, it seems to be, is moving away from this bloody religion.
Okay.
And are saying that what God really wants is not animals on an altar, for heaven's sake. What good's that going to do? What he wants is to love justice and to be humble. By being humble means not arrogant. Doesn't mean go around being humiliated. And in other words, to do justice and be kind and good. And that's wholly acceptable to God. I think this is part of one of the traditions among the rabbis. And they were, in that sense, upstaging or preempting the priesthood. The priesthood, after all, in Jerusalem in the first century had gotten in bed with the Roman government, and they were called the Sadducees. The Pharisees.
Once again, you said priesthood. Did you mean rabbis?
No, I'm not. Okay. I'm talking about the Sadducees with the priesthood, the rabbis.
I don't have a clear model of the split and how that would have occurred. Then.
The Pharisees were moving more in the direction of a book religion, a learning religion, a service religion, a relationship religion, and they were moving away from the Sadducees. And Paul, you remember, the apostle, he didn't just come up with his vision. Visions, after all, are just representing thinking. Paul then was a Pharisee, not a Sadducee. So he's representing the Pharisaic tradition of relating to God. Now, unfortunately, in parts of the New Testament, the Pharisees are terribly misrepresented, in my opinion.
I was about to say, and it sounds to me this must be all like late 1st and 2nd century AD then?
First
when
century,
this is going
probably,
on?
Yeah.
Okay.
And before the early Christianity, you had the Pharisaic tradition beginning and developing slowly but surely, because I think the notion, and by the time you get to Paul, he is saying, in effect, we don't need animal sacrifices, and we don't even need circumcision. And a lot of these dietary rules and regulations we don't need, at least for the Gentiles.
Gentiles don't need to take it. And they cannot accept it.
And you have the book of Acts, in which Peter presumably has a vision, but I think it represents the thinking going on. This vision just, in which the voice of Christ tells him to go ahead and eat the meat that's supposedly unclean. And eat it, not sacrifice it, eat it.
Yeah, he was a guest at someone's table, and they presented him with something that hadn't been properly prepared, I guess.
Well, that was part of his tradition, which he argued against. He and Paul argued on this point.
Right. Well, we got a little under 2 minutes now. We should think if there are any points we need to hit on, and then around half a minute or so before we need to do the regular close-up. So do you got any high points you want there?
Yeah, let me mention that Moab, the king of Moab, apparently the Israelites were coming in to make war, and the king of Moab offered his own son as a sacrifice.
Okay.
And somehow that shocked the Israelites, the way you can read it, and they left. Now, you could interpret that in several ways, one of which, okay, I'll give you my prince, and that ought to satisfy you. That'd be one way.
Okay.
Another way,
a little bit like what Jesus and Jehovah were. Yeah.
Or among animals.
We got 30 seconds to do the wrap-up.
It's a little bit like animals are running away from a wolf pack, and one of the animals gets behind, and the wolf pounces on it. That's a substitutionary atonement.
All right.
The rest of them are ransomed. They are.
Okay. Well, let's wrap things up here. Please get out a pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Please give us feedback or leave us voicemail at the number that I think should come up on the screen soon. You can see this program most Tuesdays from 5 to 6 p.m.
So join us and come with questions and comments. We do enjoy them.
We want to thank Sam and Larry for technical help and all the staff here at CTV Knox, and especially our callers, as those who came on the line with us. And please call in next week. This is Freethought Forum.